The organ played low, steady notes. I felt a sudden weight in my coat pocket, too heavy for grief alone. Her perfume lingered as she hugged me. Seconds later, the faint buzz of a phone against my chest betrayed her gift. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. My name is Walter. I'm 72 years old, and this is what really happened. They buried my wife on a Tuesday morning in Kentucky, right outside Bowling Green, where we'd lived for 38 years. A thin mist clung to the cemetery lawn, like cobwebs that wouldn't clear. The grass still held dew, damp enough to darken shoes. The air had that sharp autumn bite, not enough for a coat buttoned all the way up, but enough to remind you the season was closing fast. Church bells didn't ring that morning, they moaned. Long, uneven throbs like a wounded animal, like they knew the truth better than the people in the pews. Eleanor had been gone just 4 days. 4 days, but already my daughter-in-law, Clara, had wrapped her hands around the entire service. Every detail, every choice. She picked the hymns, the readings, even the priest. She said I was too old, too tired, to be bothered with logistics. That word, logistics. Cold, stripped of feeling, like burying a woman you'd shared a lifetime with was the same as mailing a package across state lines. My granddaughter Ava caught me at the entrance of the church, 17 years old, blonde like her mother, but with my wife's eyes, a gray-green that could hold you still. She hugged me, tight, too tight, the kind of hug that carried weight, not comfort. And that's when I felt it, subtle, the faintest shift inside my coat pocket. She whispered, "Stay strong, Grandpa." But I didn't miss it, the slight push of her hand, slipping something against my chest before she let go. She turned and walked back to the third pew. Didn't look over her shoulder, didn't need to. The organ droned again, a low hum, deliberate, heavy, the kind of sound that presses more than it plays. I sat beside the closed casket, mahogany, polished, the kind of shine you could see your face in. Overpriced, but Clara had insisted. On the brass plate, Eleanor May Hart, 1952 to 2025. I slid my hand inside my coat pocket. My fingers touched cold glass and a thin metal frame. A phone, not mine. I didn't flinch, didn't look down, just stared forward at Eleanor's name, as if my eyes alone could keep her here. Clara nodded toward the priest. He took his cue. All breath, all ritual. 2 pews ahead, Ava rested her hand in her purse. Not for tissues, not to dab her eyes. No tears. Her hand just lingered there, waiting as though the purse itself were a fuse box. Then it came. A vibration, short, soft, then another. They wanted something, a trigger, a sound, a slip, a confession. The nerve to try this in a church, in front of her coffin. I stayed still. Let it play. Eleanor hated technology, wouldn't let me near a smartphone until last year. "I like your voice the old way," she used to say, "not through a screen." She would have laughed at this, a spy game in the middle of her own funeral, except it wasn't a game. Not to Clara. 3 months before Eleanor died, the doctor told us. Aggressive lung cancer, a wolf at the door. We tried every treatment they offered, but death doesn't bargain. It doesn't pause for signatures or paperwork. 1 week before the end, Eleanor changed her will, left everything, the house, the savings, the pension, to me and the grandkids. Nothing for Clara. "She's circling like a vulture," Eleanor whispered one night, her chest rattling with every breath. "Promise me she doesn't get a cent." I promised. We drove to the Warren County Clerk's office, a gray building with bad lighting, the kind that made everyone look pale. The clerk had blue nail polish, chipped at the edges. She stamped the change, notarized it. Civil claim number 24, CV7012. I memorized it like scripture. Clara didn't find out until the reading. That's when her face froze. No tears, no protest, just a look that said, "This isn't over." Back in the pew, I scanned the room. The church was small, wooden beams overhead, dark and heavy, carpet thick enough to muffle footsteps. Candles flickered along the walls, throwing soft light over faces I'd known most of my life. Neighbors, friends, the old pastor from the bowling league, folks from the hardware store, but a few I didn't recognize, two young men in the back row, suits too sharp for a funeral this small, their posture too rigid, their eyes too alert. Ava glanced at them once, then forward again. The trap was set. The priest's voice filled the space. To everything there is a season. His words bounced off the wood, hung in the air too long. I leaned back, felt the phone press against my chest. Maybe they expected me to crack. Maybe they thought I'd mutter Eleanor's name, or curse Clara, or whisper something that could be twisted later. I did none of that. I breathed slow. Another vibration, this one longer. A recording. That was my confirmation. In the back row, one of the men raised a camera. Subtle. A flash. Not at the coffin. Not at the priest. At me. They weren't honoring the dead. They were documenting the fall of an old man. Clara had painted this scene in her mind already. Her grieving father-in-law, blinded by sorrow, spilling words that could be used against him. A confession they could carry into court. She'd claim undue influence, argue that I manipulated Eleanor's final days, that the will wasn't her choice but mine, that Clara, the dutiful daughter-in-law, had been unfairly cut out. All she needed was evidence. Only one problem. She was sloppy. Because as Ava hugged me, she hadn't just slipped the phone into my coat. She'd whispered something, and the phone caught that too. Just leave it on, Grandpa. Don't worry. We'll take care of everything. It sounded innocent, harmless, the kind of line you say when you don't know what to say. But in court, with the right lawyer, it meant premeditation, collusion, manipulation. In Kentucky? Kentucky is a one-party consent state. I kept my expression flat. Let the game continue. The next hymn rose from the organ. Abide with me, Eleanor's favorite. The sound poured soft, solemn. But I didn't hear the organ. Not really. I heard her. I heard her in the kitchen humming that same hymn while scrubbing plates. Always off-key, always cheerful. I let the memory play until it hurt. The phone in my pocket buzzed again, then stopped. I raised my eyes toward the priest. Father Donnelly, late 60s. Known him since the 90s. We used to drink cheap beer after Saturday service. He met my gaze, held it. I gave him the slightest nod, and he returned it. Barely there. He'd seen Ava's hand. He'd heard her whisper. He knew something was wrong. The reading ended. Would anyone like to share a few words? Donnelly asked. Clara rose before I could move. She walked to the podium. Black dress, pearl earrings, the ones Eleanor never gave her. She pressed a tissue to her eyes, dry. Eleanor was complex, she said. She didn't always say what she felt, but I knew she loved us, all of us. A pause, calculated. Even in the end, when things got difficult, her voice cracked, perfectly timed. She trusted us to carry her memory, to honor her legacy, even when others made that harder than it needed to be. She turned her head, looked straight at me. Ava's eyes dropped to her lap. Another camera flash. This time, not at me. At Clara. Her face locked in its mask of grief. I stayed silent. Let them record. Let them build their little case. Because they'd forgotten something. You don't plant a weapon in a man's coat without knowing what else he's carrying. Certainly. Continuing from the previous part. The scent hit just as the second hymn started. Lilacs. Mixed with amber. The exact blend Eleanor wore every spring. But it wasn't drifting from the casket. Number. Clara had dabbed it behind her ears. I caught it as she leaned toward Ava, her lips close, whispering something that made the girl nod, quick, jittery, the nod of someone caught between obedience and fear. The first verse rose up, fragile. led by shaky voices and hesitant piano chords. Amazing grace! How sweet the sound! Except nothing about this moment felt sweet. Not the voices, not the perfume, not the eyes darting around the pews. I closed mine, bowed my head like the rest, pretended to pray. But the phone buzzed again, a soft, rhythmic pulse against my chest, like the steady tick of a timer, wired to something waiting to blow. Their hope was clear. They wanted me to break, to whisper something that would hang heavy in the stillness, to curse Clara, to mourn out loud, to hand them a weapon wrapped in grief. I kept still, but my mind wasn't. I replayed Ava's words, not just what she whispered while pressing the phone into my coat. Everything from before. 2 weeks ago, a Saturday afternoon, she'd shown up at my door with a plate of cookies, chocolate chip, warm enough that the chips still glistened soft. She'd never done that before, not once in 17 years. We sat together on the porch swing, the one that creaked on the right chain when you leaned too far. She smiled, a little too wide. Asked about the will. I told her the truth, that her college fund was safe, that Eleanor had made sure of it. Her smile stretched further, though her eyes darted away. Then she asked if I'd ever thought of recording my thoughts. For history. For memory. I thought it was sweet. I thought she cared. Now I saw it plain. The start of a setup. The cookies. The perfume. The distance she kept today. Not sitting beside me the way she always had at every family event. Always with her hand in mine. This wasn't her idea, but she was part of it. The hymn ended. Silence returned, heavy as a stone. Behind me the pew creaked, the faint shift of someone leaning forward. Then came the whisper. A female voice, sharp, close. Make sure it's still recording. I didn't turn, didn't twitch, but the phone caught it. Every syllable. Another creak, a shuffle of shoes against the carpet, then the click of a camera shutter, and Ava's voice followed, hushed, quick, a little uneven. It's on. It's been on. A rustle of fabric. That's not what I meant, Clara hissed. Then silence. The weight of their mistakes settled in the air like dust. I shifted slightly, slow enough that no one noticed. Let the phone slide deeper into the lining of my coat, the microphone still exposed through the thin wool. They thought they'd planted a trap. They hadn't. They'd planted evidence, against themselves. Father Donnelly stepped forward again, his hand resting gently on the pulpit. Before we close, I'd like to offer a moment of silent reflection. Eleanor was a woman of grace, even in her most trying moments. Heads bowed in unison, the hush was almost holy. But I didn't bow. I looked down the pew. Eric's seat was empty. My son, my only boy. He hadn't come. He was working offshore. Oil rigs off the coast of Louisiana. At least that's what Clara said. I hadn't heard his voice since Eleanor changed the will. Clara told me he couldn't handle it, that it would upset him, that he was fragile. Fragile. My son, who worked 12-hour shifts on steel platforms in the Gulf, in storms that bent the horizon. He wasn't fragile. He was misled. The silent reflection ended. Donnelly stepped back to the altar, his eyes lingering on me a fraction longer than necessary. The organ swelled with a closing chord, deep enough to rattle the pews, and then came the part they had rehearsed. Ava stood, her legs stiff, but steady enough. She stepped into the aisle. Clara rose a second later, timing herself just behind her daughter. They moved forward, slow, deliberate, their faces composed for the watching eyes. I stayed seated. Ava reached the casket first. She laid a single white rose on the polished lid. Her lips moved, whispered something meant for display. Theatrics. Clara stepped up beside her. She placed her hand on top of the rose, held it there, stretched out the moment until the pause became unbearable. Then she turned, looked at me. Would you like a moment? She asked. Her voice was soft, gentle, trained for the camera. I rose, careful, letting the slowness of my age show, letting them see the grief in the lines of my face. I met her eyes. No, I said, my voice steady, flat. I've had mine. And I walked past them, not to the coffin, not to the altar, straight down the aisle, straight to the back row. The two men in suits shifted as I approached, unsure whether to stand. I stopped in front of them, reached into my coat, drew the phone out into the light. Still recording, I said, my voice carrying across the quiet church. Hope you got what you needed. Both men turned toward Clara, waiting for direction, her face drained of color. What? What are you doing? She stammered. I'm just following your instructions. The words cut sharp, clean. I turned then, held the phone out toward Father Donnelly. He stepped forward, calm as stone. He took it without hesitation, slipped it into a small velvet pouch, the kind used for offerings. Then he pulled the string tight, sealed it. Sanctuary law may not apply here, he said, his voice low but firm. But I witnessed the exchange, in full. The words rang out, carried like a bell. Clara's face twisted. What exchange? She snapped. What are you talking about? But her daughter didn't look at her. Ava looked at me, and this time the tears on her face were real. I didn't want to, she whispered. Her voice broke. She made me. I nodded, not with anger, but with something closer to understanding. Clara's hand shot out. She gripped Ava's wrist, hard. Don't say another word. But it was too late. The coffin lid lowered, the latch catching with a soft metallic click. The sound echoed through the church, louder than the organ, and in that moment I felt it. The shift, the turn, the first crack in Clara's design, certainly, continuing from the previous part. The candles flickered as the pallbearers stepped forward. Shadows leaned and straightened against the church walls, dancing across the faces of the mourners, as if the flames themselves resisted this ending. 4 men took their places around Eleanor's casket. All of them had been part of our lives in Warren County since the beginning. One retired firefighter, Bill Turner, who once carried Eleanor out of a smoke-filled kitchen after she forgot about cornbread in the oven back in '96. 2 men from our old poker group, friends who'd lost more dimes to her laughter than to my hand, and Harold, my barber. He hadn't charged me the last time I came in, just snipped, brushed me off, then set the clippers down with a look I couldn't quite meet. He said, "You're bearing more than a wife, Walt. You're bearing your rhythm." He was right. They lifted the polished mahogany slowly, shoulders straining, the weight of her body and all those years pressing through their arms. The sound of their shoes thudding into the carpet was soft, but each step landed in my chest like a hammer. Final, steady, and yet nothing about it felt finished. I followed a few paces behind. My legs felt like they were moving through syrup. Behind me I could hear the hushed rustle of dresses, the clicking heels of Clara, and the quieter, uncertain steps of Ava. Father Donnelly walked ahead, the velvet pouch clutched in his weathered hand. When he reached me near the church doors, he said nothing. He didn't need to, just gave me a single steady nod. Then he slid the pouch into his inner jacket pocket, slow and deliberate, like a man receiving communion bread, like something sacred had passed between us. Outside, the sky had broken open into a cold drizzle, the kind that soaks you without warning, trickling down the back of your neck no matter how you shrug. Kentucky clay turns slick fast when it rains. The ground out there was red and sticky, the kind that stains shoes for weeks and clings to shovels long after you've cleaned them. Clay like that keeps secrets if you bury them deep enough. They lowered Eleanor into the earth, ropes sliding slow, wood groaning softly. Heads bowed, the prayers began, words heavy with ritual but hollow in the damp air. A few tossed flowers after her, roses mostly, petals bruised by the drizzle. And still no one said a word about the phone. Not Clara, not Ava, not the men in suits lingering back near the fence. Clara smiled through it all, perfectly composed, hugged people as though grief had polished her into something noble. She even posed when the funeral director suggested a memory photo for the program. Standing beside Ava, chin tilted just so, like she was at a gala and not her mother-in-law's grave. Ava stood stiff at her side, her arms wrapped around herself as if she didn't quite trust her own limbs anymore. I waited, silent, because sometimes revenge isn't about shouting. Sometimes it's not about noise at all. It's a rope you leave in their hands, and you wait, and you let them pull. We returned to the house on Miller Street, the one Eleanor and I bought in 1989, with a VA loan and a prayer scribbled on the back of a grocery receipt. Back then, the yard was bare dirt, the paint flaking. We made it a home with sweat and secondhand furniture. Now it smelled of deli trays and cheap wine, salt, vinegar, processed ham. Condolences bought in plastic containers. The living room filled with murmurs, soft conversations, fragments of shared stories, the low hum of people who didn't quite know what to do with themselves. Some laughed nervously. Others whispered about the will when they thought I wasn't listening. Clara floated through it all like a hostess, bouncing plates, handing out polite smiles as if they were favors. Her performance hadn't ended at the church doors. She was still on stage, and the audience was still watching. I slipped into my den, quiet, closed the door, turned the lock, and called my attorney. Harold Griggs, 64. Hair mostly gone, glasses always sliding down his nose. His office was tucked next to the DMV, a place where people muttered about lost tags and long lines, while he pieced together wills and property disputes. He answered on the second ring. "This urgent?" "You remember that recording law you told me about?" I asked, my voice low, steady. "One-party consent in Kentucky?" "Yeah," he sighed. I could hear him shifting in his chair. "Walter, you didn't—" "No," I cut him off. "They did." Silence. Then a long breath. "Bring it in tomorrow," he said. "I don't have it," I replied. "Donnelly does." There was a pause, then a dry chuckle. "Well, I'll be damned. So the priest's our witness? He saw the whole thing. Even better." Another pause. He lowered his voice. "What did it catch?" I stared across the den. On the wall hung a photo in a wooden frame, Eleanor holding our son in '84, both of them laughing with their mouths wide open. That was the kind of joy that made time feel endless. "Whispers," I said. "Commands." Pressure. He didn't ask for more. He didn't need to. An hour later, a knock came at my den door. Sharp. Twice. "Mind if we talk?" Clara's voice. I opened it. She stepped in carrying a cup of tea. My favorite mug. The old one with the faded Cardinals logo. The one Eleanor used to fill for me every morning with too much sugar and not nearly enough tea. "Thought you could use this," she said softly. "You've been quiet." I took the mug but didn't drink. The steam was thin, already cooling. "Sometimes quiet means watching," I said. She smiled at that, a practice smile. "Still the poet, huh?" I didn't answer. She sat down across from me, smoothing her black dress over her knees. "We're all grieving," she said. Her tone was gentle, rehearsed. Stress makes people say things, do things they don't mean. I looked at her, like plant phones on their father-in-law. Her smile froze, just for a second, cracked like glass. "I don't know what you mean." "You do," I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "And Ava does too." She stood quickly, anger flashing through the mask. "Well, if you're going to accuse your family of conspiracy, maybe grief's hit harder than I thought." I leaned back, lifted the mug, sipped. Lukewarm, tasteless. "How did you think this would end?" I asked quietly. "That I'd say something into the phone? That you'd twist my words into a claim of coercion?" "I have no idea what you're talking about," she snapped, her control thinning. I rose to my feet, slow, steady, looked her dead in the eye. "Then you've got nothing to worry about when my lawyer hears it." Her mouth opened, then closed. She turned on her heel and left without another word. In the hallway, Ava waited. She didn't look at her mother, just slipped past her. She stepped into the den, closed the door gently behind her. I didn't want to do it, she said. Her voice cracked. I know, I said. She told me if I didn't help, she'd pull the college fund. Said it wasn't locked in. She lied. Ava's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Grandpa. I nodded. You're 17, Ava. You've still got time to be better than her. Then I handed her the empty mug. Now go wash that out. We're not poisoning the good china. She smiled through tears, a small, trembling smile, then left without another word. The next morning I met Harold at the courthouse. He listened to the audio twice. No interruptions, no questions. His glasses slid lower with each replay until they rested on the edge of his nose. When it ended, he closed his eyes, sat back in his chair, and let out a long breath. Then he opened his briefcase. He drafted the initial motion, civil defense, preservation of estate rights, wrote it in careful lines, each word like a nail hammered into wood. He added the phone as sealed evidence. Exhibit A. He looked at me. We don't just have their trap. We've got their voices springing it. Then he stamped the papers, filed them under case number 25, CV1119 at Warren County Circuit. And just like that, the funeral stunt stopped being theirs. It became mine. The courthouse in Bowling Green doesn't look like much. 2 stories. Red brick, weathered by decades of storms. The flagpole out front always carried something limp and heavy, and these days it seemed the flag stayed at half-mast, more than full. The stone steps creaked faintly under weight, the kind that reminded you how many feet had passed over them. Farmers in boots, mothers in heels, men in handcuffs. Inside, the air had its own permanence, a mixture of toner, floor wax, and damp paper. Eleanor used to wrinkle her nose every time we came here, for building permits, property taxes, her PTA elections. She'd whisper just loud enough for me to hear. Justice smells like pine sol and printer ink. It felt fitting then that I walked in carrying her last line of defense in a padded evidence envelope. Harold met me halfway up the steps. He didn't waste words. His briefcase bounced against his leg like it was part of his stride. Already in motion, already building momentum. He'd filed for a temporary estate freeze, standard procedure when someone contests a will. But here, we weren't reacting. We were striking first. Inside, Harold leaned across the clerk's counter, his voice crisp. I'm not accusing them yet. Just making sure no documents mysteriously change hands before probate closes. The clerk, a young man with a veteran's ball cap pulled low, a limp in his left leg, looked us both over. He tapped the paperwork with his finger. Seen this before. Usually it's kids fighting over boats and beach houses. Harold didn't blink, didn't even twitch his lips into a smile. This is about legacy, he said, and the way his voice carried made the clerk stop tapping. Back home, things shifted. Fast. By Thursday, Clara was pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. Phone on speaker, voice sharp enough to cut glass. She was shouting at Eric. She's making this up. Your dad's turning Ava against me. I stepped in, just enough to see the scene. Ava sat at the kitchen table, small against the backdrop of all that noise, both hands clutched around a glass of milk. Not drinking, just holding on, like it was the only solid thing she had left. Clara didn't even see me, didn't acknowledge me. She stormed down the hallway door to the guest room, slamming so hard the frame rattled. Ava finally looked up, her voice small. She told Dad I manipulated her, that I faked the audio. I pulled out a chair, sat across from her. Your mom's cornered, I said. When people get cornered, they try to drag others into the cage. Ava's eyes flickered. She said you'll lose everything. I let a thin smile tug at my mouth. She said that last week, too. Then she forgot to hit mute. For the first time that day, Ava exhaled through her nose, almost a laugh. Almost. Friday morning, the phone rang. Harold. Check your mailbox, he said. I walked out onto the porch. drizzle still hanging in the air, and pulled a thick envelope from the rusted box. The county seals stared back at me. Inside, 2 documents. First, probate court acknowledgement of will is valid, based on Eleanor's notarized revision. Filed February 9th, stamped March 3rd. Second, temporary restraining order on estate asset transfers initiated by Clara Hart, pending investigation. I traced the ink with my finger. At the bottom of both papers, a signature. Judge Neil Blanton, local conservative. A man who didn't move fast unless you stepped on his boots. I called Harold back. Clara won't be able to move funds, sell property, or alter trusts, he said. Not until this gets reviewed. Will there be a hearing? There will. And the phone's admissible. So is Donnelly's statement. And Ava, if it comes to that. I leaned against the kitchen counter, the document still open in my hand. Good. Then I noticed something else. Folded neatly behind the orders, one more slip of paper. A notarized statement. Signed by Ava. She must have gone to the county clerk herself. Quiet. Alone. Stronger than she thought she was. The house felt different that evening. Quieter. Heavier. Clara cooked dinner, her Olive Garden knockoff pasta. She used to brag about how it was hers, though the recipe was Eleanor's. I remembered the smell of garlic in Eleanor's hands, the sound of her humming while stirring sauce. Clara's version tasted like imitation. No one ate much. Forks scraped plates? Nothing more. Ava cleared her dish early, disappeared into her room without a word. That left Clara and me at the table. Silence stretched until it snapped. You're ruining everything, she said flatly. I kept my eyes on her. No, you did that. I just stopped pretending not to notice. She scoffed, a sharp exhale through her nose. I took care of Eleanor. I handled her meds, her appointments. You just sat around and held her hand. She asked me to, I said. She trusted me. I pushed my chair back, rose slowly. She did trust you, until she saw the copies of her Medicare statements routed to your name. The ones you said were for paperwork. Until she found out about the joint account you opened in your maiden name. Clara blinked, hard, a flash of panic rippling beneath her face. You don't have proof. You're right, I said, calm, steady. Then I pulled a folded slip from my back pocket, laid it on the table between us. County clerk, recorded deed revocation, property reassigned solely to Walter Hart, per spousal survivorship. Clara's hand trembled as she picked it up. Eleanor filed this? On February 7th, I said, right after you tried to transfer the title behind her back. Her lips parted, shook her head. She was dying. And you thought that meant she was blind. I stepped past her. You didn't just try to rob a dying woman, I said quietly. You did it from inside her own house. Clara followed me halfway down the hall, voice climbing with every word. I built this family. I cleaned up after everyone. I did what I had to. I turned, met her eyes, and now you'll face what has to happen. Then I opened the front door. You need to leave. Her eyes darted, flickered. Something inside her cracked. You think you can throw me out? I stepped aside. No, the court will. But I'm giving you the chance to walk out before they escort you. That night, drawers slammed. Closet doors rattled. A vase shattered. One Eleanor bought in Charleston in '93. The shards scattered across the floor like ice. Ava stood at the top of the stairs, clutching the railing, watching, silent. The last thing Clara said, standing in the doorway with her bags, was, You don't know what you've started. She was wrong. I knew exactly what I'd started. The following Monday, the hearing room smelled like old paper and nervous sweat. Courtroom C, Warren County Courthouse. The kind of place where family secrets get aired like dirty laundry under fluorescent lights. Judge Neil Blanton presided from his high-back chair, chin tucked low, shoulders hunched in that way men get when they've seen too many people lie for too many years. He didn't look at us with pity or interest, just skepticism. A man who had seen 100 family disputes and didn't trust a single one. He shuffled through the docket, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, then fixed his eyes on Clara. "Mrs. Hart," he said slowly, his voice gravel across the oak benches. "You are contesting the final revision of the will dated February 9th. Clara rose, black blazer pressed stiff. Her hair was pinned so tight it looked painful, a bun meant to make her appear composed. Her hands clutched a folder like it was a weapon. Her voice came out steady, practiced, but only at first. "Yes, Your Honor. My late mother-in-law was under extreme influence. She was medicated, vulnerable. The document was altered without full mental capacity." Blanton didn't blink, just leaned back a fraction. "And your evidence of this?" Clara opened the folder with a snap. Papers rustled. The decedent's attending physician noted confusion. "Fatigue. I have copies of her medical records." She placed them on the table with a flourish, as though the paper itself could condemn me. Blanton scanned them briefly. His expression didn't change. He'd seen thicker stacks mean less. Then his eyes shifted toward Harold. "Mr. Griggs?" Harold rose. His suit was plain, his tie crooked in the knot, but his presence carried the calm weight of a man who had been in this room more times than he cared to count. "Your Honor, we have not only the notarized revision signed and filed in accordance with Kentucky law, but also audio evidence, planted by the petitioner's daughter, that confirms intent to falsify influence, along with a live witness to the exchange." Blanton's brows twitched, just slightly. "Audio evidence?" Harold lifted the padded envelope as though he were holding something sacred. "Submitted under Exhibit A, time-stamped, verified, chain of custody intact." The judge's eyes narrowed. "And the witness?" From the gallery, Father Donnelly stood, his clerical collar bright against his black jacket. He walked forward with a slow steadiness, the quiet authority of a man who rarely spoke unless it mattered. "Your Honor," he said, voice deep but even, "I witnessed the funeral exchange firsthand. I received the recording device directly. I heard the whispered instructions to the minor and the attempt to provoke the respondent." The room went quiet. Even the shuffle of papers stilled. Blanton turned to Clara, his gaze heavy, waiting. Clara sat frozen, her jaw worked, but no words came. And then came the sound of footsteps. Small, light. Ava. She entered in her school uniform, her hair pulled back into a simple ponytail, her backpack strapped still over one shoulder, as though she'd come straight from first period. She looked smaller than I remembered, fragile against the walls of justice, but she didn't waver. The bailiff swore her in. Her voice trembled on the words, but she finished. Blanton softened, just a fraction. His tone was different now, gentle. "Ava," he said, "tell me what happened." She swallowed. Her eyes darted toward Clara, then away again. "My mom made me put a phone in my grandpa's coat during the funeral," she said. Her voice wavered, but she kept going. "She said it was just in case he said something they could use." Blanton leaned forward. "Use for what?" Ava's hands twisted together. "To get the will reversed." The judge's jaw set. His voice stayed calm. "And what happened?" "It recorded her," Ava said, louder this time. "It recorded my mom, telling me what to do, whispering instructions, not him." The silence after that stretched long. Blanton nodded once. "Did your grandfather ever ask you to record anything?" "No, sir." "Did he threaten you in any way?" Ava's voice steadied. "No." Then she turned her head toward Clara. Just for a moment, her eyes filled. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered, "but I'm not lying for you." The words cracked the room open. Clara didn't move, didn't blink. She sat as though the bench had swallowed her. After a short recess, Judge Blanton returned. His black robe swayed as he settled back into the chair, his gavel resting at his fingertips. He cleared his throat. "This court finds no evidence of undue influence on the decedent," he said, voice firm, sharp enough to cut through bone. "The will revision dated February 9th stands as valid." Clara flinched. Blanton continued, each word deliberate. The petitioner's actions indicate premeditated manipulation. As such, this court grants the respondent full authority over the estate, without further contest. He let the words hang, then added, additionally, the court will refer this matter to the county's fraud division for review. That was the nail. Clara's face drained of color, lips pressed tight. The bailiff gave her a single knowing nod. Case closed. The gavel struck. Outside, the air smelled of cut grass and diesel from a city truck groaning past the courthouse. Life went on, oblivious to the fact that a family war had just ended inside. Ava stood beside me on the courthouse steps. She didn't say much, just looked up at the sky for a while, then down at her phone. Dad texted, she said finally. He wants to talk. I nodded. Let him. Truth has a way of catching up, no matter where you hide. She looked at me, her eyes tired but clear. Thanks for protecting her memory. I placed a hand on her shoulder, felt how small she still was, and yet how much heavier her heart had become. Thanks for protecting yours, I said. A week later, I found myself standing at Eleanor's grave. The grass was still patchy. Fresh dirt still sank in uneven ridges around the stone. I brought flowers, lilies and lilacs, her favorite mix. The stone was new, polished smooth. Beneath her name and dates, I'd had something carved. Loved fiercely, fought quietly, remembered forever. I stood there longer than I planned, listening to the breeze move through the oaks, watching the sky darken to dusk. Then I heard footsteps behind me, soft, careful. A man in a blue jacket stopped a few feet away. Mr. Hart? He asked. I turned. Badge, County Fraud Unit. He spoke low. We've concluded our preliminary inquiry. Based on the audio and financial documents, we'll be moving forward. I nodded once. Do what you need to. He hesitated, almost out of respect. We don't see many like her. Smart, bold, ruthless. I turned back to the stone. My voice was steady. She forgot one thing. The agent tilted his head. What's that? I exhaled. You don't bury secrets next to people who spent their whole lives telling the truth. By the end of the month, the house had gone quiet again. No more slammed drawers. No more angry phone calls echoing through the walls. The phone, the little piece of glass and metal that almost broke us, stayed sealed in its evidence bag. Untouched, the will stood. Solid, untouchable now. The attorney fees were covered, paid in full. And Ava, she got her letter, thick envelope, gold crest. Indiana University, full scholarship, pre-law. I read it twice, smiled once. Eleanor would have been proud. She would have laughed and said, that girl could argue the bark off a tree. Clara left Kentucky, filed a complaint in another county. It was dismissed before the ink dried. No one's heard from her since, but I still keep the phone. Not out of anger, not out of revenge. For proof, because sometimes grief doesn't hollow you out. Sometimes it sharpens you, makes you see clearer than you ever did before. And in the stillness of a sacred goodbye, I showed them what they'd forgotten. That the oldest man in the room can still be the sharpest, especially when you try to bury him with the woman he loved. If this story struck a chord, hit like, subscribe, and tell me what you think in the comments.